Hi guys, and welcome to Cultnomics. My name is Paul Hanley, and today I'm going to be chatting to you about the fiscal multiplier. Here we will look at an example of fiscal multiplier in action. We will start off with an expansionary fiscal policy, so an increase in government spending. This is of 100 billion in terms of increased spending in the economy by the government, and the MPC, the marginal propensity to consume from households, is 0.6. So this means that for every euro that a household receives extra, it will consume 0.6 of this, or 60 cents in this case. Okay, so if the government expands the economy with an extra 100 billion of spending, the change in spending in round one in the economy is 100 billion. So this expenditure goes directly into the economy, is injected straight in, which means that the total increase in GDP is 100 billion in round one. Now, the multiplier effect is that this spending can be recirculated in the economy, and that the additional 100 billion of spending may generate additional wages and jobs for people, and these additional wages and jobs will eventually lead to more spending in round two. So for example, if the 100 spending went to a construction worker who was working on a new motorway, well then that extra money that they get, the MPC tells us that they will spend 60% of it. So in round two, when the direct spending generates additional income in the economy, people will spend on average 60% of it, and 60% of 100 is 60 billion. So in round two, 60 billion is now generated from additional income here, and the total increase in GDP becomes the 100 billion plus the 60 billion in round two. So now we have 160 billion added to the economy. However, we know that this extra 60 billion in spending will also create another 60 billion in income, of which people will still spend 60 or 0.6 of it, which means that the 60 billion in round two of spending will actually generate 60 billion multiplied by again 0.6, and what this gives us is 36 billion. So now in round three we have an extra 36 billion generated by 60 billion extra income, and this is added on to the total increase in GDP. So now we have 196 billion increase in total GDP. However, it doesn't stop there, because this 36 billion will generate extra income of 36 billion, of which 60% of it will be spent. So in round four we will have 21.6 billion in extra spending in the economy. We can add this on to our GDP to see what the total increase is, which will be 217 billion 0.6, and this will continue on right down to the last figure down here, which would be 0. So the very last round where the incremental increase in spending is 0 in this case here. Now, there is actually a shortcut route to aggregating this increase in GDP. So what actually happens in this case is we can multiply the initial spending, which was 100 billion of government spending in the economy. We can multiply this by what we call the fiscal multiplier. So the fiscal multiplier is a summary of all the maths that we were trying to work out in the table, and the fiscal multiplier in this case is the 100 billion, which we started off with, multiplied by the fiscal multiplier is 1 divided by 1 minus MPC, or marginal propensity to consume. So it's whatever is injected into the economy, 100 billion here, multiplied by this formula over here. So the 100 billion is multiplied by, we'll fill in the figures here, 1 over 1 minus, and the MPC we know is 0.6. So it becomes 1 over 1 minus 0.6. That means that it's 100 now, multiplied by 1 over, and 1 minus 0.6 is 0.4. So it's 100 multiplied by 1 over 0.4, which means 100 multiplied by, if we work this out, it's 2.5. So in the final and in the total column, what we have is an increase in fiscal expenditure of 100 billion when it's multiplied up in the economy, the fiscal multiplier effect. What it causes is a 250 billion euro increase in GDP. So the total increase in this case here is 250 billion in the economy based on different rounds of expenditure, and the fact that increased spending causes increased income, which in turn will be spent again in different rounds of spending until this becomes zero. Now, just as an add-on to this one here, this is the case of increased expenditure, the 100 billion. If the government was to try and implement expansionary fiscal policy through a tax reduction to the same value of 100 billion here, the effect may be somewhat less, because when the government spends 100 billion, we can be sure that this will have 100 billion round one effect, and that the multiplier will act after that. However, with a tax reduction, the equivalent of 100 billion, what may happen, especially if people aren't confident about the future, is that they may only spend maybe half of this tax reduction they're given. So the total increase in GDP may be only 50 billion in round one. Now, if we work out this and we say that this is 50 billion extra in spending, which creates 50 billion extra in income, only 0.6 of the 50 is spent in round two, which would be 30 in this case here. And what you see straight away is that the multiplier and the overall effect on the economy is going to be lower. So in this case here, if we work through the maths of it, what we would find is the increase in total GDP is actually only 125 billion. So a more direct way of getting a multiplier effect in the economy is through direct expansionary fiscal policy in terms of expenditure. The effect may be lessened if there is a tax reduction to the equivalent value, because it depends on people spending all of this tax reduction, which they may not do. I hope you call back to Cultnomics soon. Bye for now.